My name is Sergeant Daniel Harlow. Most folks just call me Dan. I'm 36, and I've spent the last 14 years serving in the U.S. Army, mostly as a mechanical technician. I wasn't born into a military family or raised to chase rank. I joined because I needed structure, and somewhere along the way, I found purpose. For most of my career, I was the guy fixing what no one else wanted to deal with. Sand-choked engines, busted-up mobility frames, old gear long past its prime. I got good at making things work with almost nothing. That kind of skill doesn't show up on paper, but out there in the field, it can mean the difference between someone getting out or someone getting stuck. Especially when the nearest supply chain is 1,000 miles away and you've got a half-broken wheelchair and a ticking clock. It was during a long deployment overseas, somewhere dusty and forgotten, that the idea hit me. We had this wounded corporal, legs gone from an IED. The only mobility aid available was a bulky motorized rig that needed a clean power source we didn't have. We tried everything. When it failed mid-transport, I ended up pushing him 4 miles back to camp on a board and sandbags. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of the pain in my arms, but because I knew there had to be a better way. That's when I started sketching. In the corners of maintenance logs, on the back of packaging. I didn't have a workshop, just a tiny bench behind our barracks and whatever spare parts the quartermaster didn't notice missing. But every night after rotation, I'd tinker. I wasn't designing something flashy. I wanted to build something soldiers could fix with a wrench and tape. No batteries, no software, just clean mechanics. It wasn't glamorous. I missed meals. I turned down leave. I even got written up once for using tool time after hours, but I couldn't let it go. I'd seen too many guys stuck. Not because we didn't care, but because the equipment was built for hospitals, not battlefields. What if there was a way to change that? By the time we rotated home, I had a crude prototype and a pile of notes stuffed in a duffel bag. It didn't look like much, but it folded flat, moved smooth, and didn't need a single wire. I kept refining it in my garage, testing it on rough terrain behind the base housing. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could go somewhere. But I didn't have connections. I wasn't an officer, I was just a sergeant with an idea, one I couldn't let go of, because I knew what it felt like to be left behind. And I never wanted someone else to feel that again. I still remember the sound of my boots echoing down the marble hallway as I pushed the covered prototype toward the secured conference room at the Pentagon. Every step felt too loud. I'd spent years building that thing, and now I was about to place it in front of people who could shut it down with a single look. Generals, commanders, engineers with more degrees than I had deployments. The room was colder than I expected, and not just from the air conditioning. Around the long oak table sat 6 high-ranking officers, all in full dress. At the far end was Colonel Sanders, my direct superior, whose poker face gave away nothing. Behind me, a civilian contractor fiddled with a laptop, probably setting up the projection. But no one was looking at the screen. They were looking at the tarp. I pulled it off with a quiet breath and revealed what I'd built. It wasn't sleek or beautiful. It was simple, rugged, built from salvaged field parts and reinforced with ideas born in mud, heat, and desperation. I stood beside it and introduced myself. My voice sounded thinner than I wanted. I could hear every breath between words. As I began to explain the concept, I saw their faces shift. Not interest, not yet, just calculation. They were weighing me, not just the design. A sergeant without rank or title, claiming to have solved a problem people with 10 times my funding had wrestled with for years. I could feel sweat forming behind my collar. Still, I kept going. I talked about torque ratios, frame folding under pressure, how the drive system used zero electricity. I mentioned the feedback I'd collected from medics and the reasons motors fail in sand-heavy zones. But I could feel the silence getting heavier. Eyes flicked to each other across the table. Someone cleared their throat. I glanced toward Colonel Sanders, hoping for backup. He didn't blink. The seconds stretched. In that moment, I realized something. No matter how much I'd prepared, no matter how well I understood this machine, I wasn't in that room as an innovator. I was in that room as a risk. And I could feel it coming, like a cold front rolling in over open desert. I had no idea what was about to happen, but I knew it wasn't going to be what I hoped for. Before I could finish my explanation, I saw him move. Colonel Sanders pushed back his chair slowly, stood up, and walked toward the prototype like he was sizing up a threat. His boots made a sharp sound on the tile floor, too calm, too deliberate. I stopped speaking mid-sentence. He didn't look at me. Not once. Just stared at the frame I'd built and then, with a sudden burst of motion, drove his fist straight through the main joint. The sound was deafening. Metal cracked, plastic split, and a wheel spun off and rolled across the floor before tipping over with a hollow thud. The room went silent. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. My hands were still at my sides, frozen. Colonel Sanders stood there, knuckles bleeding slightly, and looked back toward the table. His voice was low but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is junk. We don't need this crap on the field." He turned around and went back to his seat like nothing had happened. I stood there, staring at the scattered pieces, everything I'd poured into for years reduced to wreckage in seconds. No one spoke. No one moved. The generals just sat there, faces unreadable, some turning their eyes away like they didn't want to be caught watching. Something inside me cracked. Not from the destruction, from the humiliation. That wasn't just a machine he broke. That was months of skipped meals, midnight testing, every spare dollar, and every ounce of belief I had in trying to help someone out there who needed it. And he didn't even care enough to look me in the eye. I was still standing there after everyone had cleared the room. My hands were shaking, but not from anger, more like the body trying to hold itself together after something breaks inside. I crouched down, started picking up parts, like maybe if I moved fast enough, no one would notice how small I felt. A shattered joint, a bent rod, it all felt like a metaphor. Then I heard a voice behind me, calm, older, measured. I turned around and saw a woman in uniform. She wasn't one of the ones who'd sat at the table. She'd been in the back row, mostly quiet, just observing. I hadn't even noticed her face until that moment. 4 stars on her shoulder. General Monroe? She didn't speak right away. Just walked over, bent down, and picked up one of the cracked casters, turning it over in her hand, like she knew exactly what she was looking at. Then she asked if I had a personal number, not the unit line. Mine. I hesitated, thought maybe it was protocol or courtesy, a gesture to smooth things over. I gave it to her anyway. When she left, I sat in the hallway for 20 minutes. I kept telling myself she was just being polite, that she felt sorry for me, maybe wanted to avoid bad PR from a scene like that. I tried to believe it didn't matter, but it did. Because even if I never heard from her again, she hadn't laughed. She hadn't rolled her eyes. She hadn't looked away. The next day, my phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost let it ring out, but something told me to pick up. It was her. She called me Dan, not Sergeant. Said she'd reviewed my briefing packet again. That she wanted to meet. Not as part of the Army chain. Off base, personal time. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I kept thinking about how she'd watched that whole mess and still saw something worth salvaging. I didn't feel brave. I didn't even feel hopeful yet. Just confused. But she wasn't asking for a show. Just sketches, notes, anything that hadn't been stamped with a unit seal. And for the first time in days, I felt my chest loosen. Like maybe someone out there hadn't already decided who I was. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was just the part where things start to shift, even if only a little. I gathered my notebooks, the unbroken parts, and a pencil. It wasn't much, but it was enough to take that next small step. The old supply warehouse sat at the edge of the base, half forgotten, its windows dusted with years of neglect. During the day, it looked like any other relic left behind by shifting budgets. But at night, under the hum of a single flickering light, it became something else. It became my workshop. I started going there after hours. No one asked questions. I had a key for my time in logistics, and no one had bothered to take it back. The air always smelled of rust and old rubber. I liked it. It felt honest, like a place where ideas didn't need permission to exist. The first few nights, I worked alone. I laid out what was left of the original prototype, bent pieces, cracked joints. I started from scratch, sketching on cardboard when I ran out of paper. It felt like being back in the field again, improvising in silence, except now I was rebuilding something that had already been broken twice. Once by war, once by ego. Then one night, a voice called out from the dark. It was Chavez, a retired mechanic who used to run armor repairs. He didn't say much, just pulled up a stool, set down a box of stripped parts, and asked what I needed. After that, others followed. Carter, an old field medic who knew exactly how gear failed under pressure. Tenny, who had lost part of his leg in Kandahar and now made custom crutches out of pipe fittings. None of them wanted credit. They just wanted to help. Every night, we tweaked. We cut, welded, tested, and every night, the design got leaner, stronger. It wasn't just a prototype anymore. It was something born from grit and experience. We weren't building for a showroom. We were building for survival. They'd bring old stories with them. Times a motor gave out in the hills. How snow killed battery life in under 20 minutes. I took notes. Every sentence mattered. Every scar they carried had something to teach me. It wasn't just theory anymore. It was lived truth. Bit by bit, the machine changed. Hinges that used to be electronic became purely mechanical. We swapped imported alloys for scrap that was easier to replace in the field. We tested it over gravel, up ramps, through doorways too narrow for standard rigs. We dropped it, soaked it, dragged it, then we fixed it again. I stopped thinking about Colonel Sanders, about the room full of uniforms and the cracking sound of my dream being shattered. That anger, that shame, it started to burn off. Not fast, but enough. Enough that I could focus on what mattered again. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling just a little when something finally worked the way it was supposed to. A clean pivot, a seamless fold, nothing fancy, just proof that it could hold, that it could last, that it was ready. Those nights reminded me why I started. Not for applause, not for approval, but because someone out there needed this. And maybe, just maybe, I was still the guy who could build it. The day of the conference felt unreal. Rows of military officials, engineers, and civilian tech heads filled the hall. Cameras lined the back wall. I stood behind the curtain, prototype beside me, hands steady for the first time in weeks. General Monroe walked on stage and introduced me. Not as a technician, as an innovator, as someone who'd built something that mattered. When the curtain pulled back, it was like the air shifted. The light hit the device just right, clean and matte, no wires, no screens, just function and form. I wheeled it out onto the stage and demonstrated the folding mechanism. The crowd leaned forward. I explained how it operated with zero electricity, how it could adapt to uneven terrain, how field repairs took under 5 minutes. Every word landed. I could see expressions change. A few eyebrows raised. Some mouths parted just slightly in surprise. Then someone in the front row started nodding. I looked up and saw a pair of hands begin to clap. Then another. And suddenly, the room filled with applause. It wasn't loud or wild, it was steady, like they understood what they were looking at. Not a prototype. A solution. My chest tightened, but not from nerves. From something close to peace. I had made it here. And the work finally spoke for itself. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted him. Colonel Sanders, standing stiff in the back row, jaw set. When the applause grew, he stepped forward and tried to speak. Something about protocol, about unapproved designs. But no one turned to him. No one asked for clarification. The air had already shifted, and he was speaking into silence. He tried again, louder this time, mentioning security clearance. Monroe turned her head, just slightly, and raised one hand to quiet him. It wasn't forceful. It didn't need to be. The room belonged to something else now. I met his eyes briefly. He looked away first. The crowd returned their attention to me. They asked about parts, production, rollout plans. I answered every question, calm and clear. Everything I'd built came from scratch, supported by veterans, tested in real-world conditions. I could see Sanders shifting, like he wanted to interrupt again, but nobody gave him the space. His words didn't land anymore. His presence had lost weight. After the session, a retired general walked up and shook my hand. Another one handed me a card and said we'd be in touch. General Monroe simply gave me a nod. It was all I needed. I didn't look for Sanders again. He was already gone by the time I turned around. Maybe he knew he'd lost. Maybe he'd never believed I'd stand here to begin with. But I had, and I didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. 3 months after the conference, I was standing in a briefing room with my name on the door. I'd been asked to lead a new division focused on practical, mechanical field tech. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. They gave me a small team, most of them veterans like me, and a mandate to get these devices into the hands of soldiers who needed them the most. We started shipping within weeks. First to a base outside Aleppo, then to an outpost near Bentiu in South Sudan. The feedback came in quietly, through after-action reports and encrypted emails. No headlines, no ceremony, just notes like, "Device held up in sand," "Saved my squad," or "Used it to drag wounded over rocks when the jeep failed." Simple words, but they meant everything. I watched videos they sent back. One showed a young corporal lifting a wounded teammate into a terrain-adaptive carrier while under fire. Another showed a medic adjusting the frame to fit a child with a shattered leg. No power, no batteries. Just leverage, steel, and design that worked when nothing else did. My chest ached when I watched those clips. Not from pain, from pride. Quiet, solid pride. At night, I'd sit in my office and stare at the old blueprints taped to the wall. I kept one of the original casters from the first prototype on my desk. The one Sanders didn't shatter. It reminded me of where it started, how close I came to walking away, and how none of this would exist if I had. We didn't save the world, but we made it a little more survivable for the people who had to carry its weight. That was enough for me. Finally, after everything, what I built had found its place. And so had I. A few weeks later, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. It was him, Colonel Sanders. I let it ring. Not because I was angry, not because I needed to prove anything. I just didn't feel the need to pick it up. Whatever he had to say didn't matter anymore. I had already moved on, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. If you've ever had someone laugh at your idea or shut you down before you even got started, I know how that feels. It hurts, but it doesn't have to end there. They said it was junk, now it's saving lives. So what have they said about your dream? Share it with me. I want to know what you're fighting for.